have a listen to the editor of Slugger O'Toole. He's been listening to the Nolan show this morning and tweeting about some of what we're saying. Mick Fealty. Morning to you, Mick.
Hi, Stephen. How you doing?
Morning. You think Karen Bradley's getting too rough a ride here this morning?
Of course she has, yeah. Well, like every Secretary of State, you know, we've had no government for 2 years. Whose fault is that? Now, to some extent, Karen Bradley and all her predecessors have taken the eye off the ball, and I would say the same criticism is due to the Southern government for not keeping steady pressure on the political parties to actually exercise some responsibility here. But the truth is, democracy is about accountability. The people who need to be made accountable are the ones that we elect. And if they consistently cannot work together in order to deliver whatever is needed in health, education, etc., and in particular, there's a very emotional issue around these victims who've been left high and dry by the refusal of the two major parties to get around the table and agree to go back into government. RHI, when is that report coming through? Everybody seems not to know when it's coming. And do you know why? Because it was commissioned by the finance minister at Stormont, and there is no possibility of it being delivered unless it is delivered to a devolved minister. That's my understanding of the protocol. So in other words, we're not even going to see RHI until these guys get back to work.
Well, you'll understand why we will go to the RHI team and check that, Mick, and see what their official
absolutely.
Position is on that.
It's a question rather than an assertion. And somebody needs to answer that question. But from my understanding, talking to senior officials at DAERA, that is, in the last sort of 6 months or so, that was their understanding. But it does need to be officially confirmed. The point being is, if the voters, and they have an opportunity here next week to send a different signal, if the voters keep voting for stasis, then this sort of stuff will keep happening. And there's nothing the Secretary of State in England can do to make...
But Sam McBride was telling us this morning that's not true, that she can do it if she wants to.
She could, of course, she could do it.
So it's not right to say there's nothing she can do. If she chose to, she could.
If she chose to override the local democracy and the local democratic choices made by the electorate in Northern Ireland, she can do anything she wants.
How's it overriding local democracy if every political party in this country is telling her, push this through Westminster?
Well,
and the head of the civil service, David Sterling.
What that is effectively, and they won't accept this explanation, but I'm perfectly entitled to my own interpretation of it. What they're actually doing is saying, this is too difficult for us. We can't get to the point where we can agree to actually do the jobs we were elected to do. So please, can you take this terrible thing off our plate? The point is, that's fine for them to ask it, but the public must understand that what they're doing is surrendering all responsibility for looking after one of the most vulnerable groups and hurt groups in our society. And we have many others of those for whom the political class at the moment is simply washing its hands and saying, we don't care.
Arlene Foster said in a statement, I think it was yesterday or the day before, in the absence of devolution, the government has a moral duty to meet this financial commitment.
Well, look, okay, there is a decision here, and Newton Emerson has been very consistent and very vocal in pointing out that we're sitting in a limbo land here, where the Assembly is still getting paid but not meeting, and civil servants are being unfairly, in my view, pushed into the position of having to be political spokesmen for every damn thing that's going wrong in their departments. That is not how the system was set up. The point is that it's okay for Arlene Foster to ask the Secretary of State to take awkward questions and deal with them at Westminster. But the point is, it's Stormont's job. And if we keep electing politicians who keep saying, but we can't really do this sort of thing, please, Secretary of State, can you please take this away from us? And then the Secretary of State is the one who is left taking all the opprobrium, and the people whose primary responsibility of it gets let off free. That is unacceptable. That is unaccountability in a supposedly democratic state. And these people are supposed to be accountable to the voters. And the only way the voters can actually change that state of affairs is to send a message and say, this is not good enough. Moral high ground in Northern Ireland is not about standing high ground. It's about somebody else standing in a valley below the high ground. Nobody in Northern Ireland seems to me at the moment capable of actually taking some responsibility. And we've seen this for generations. The Secretary of State, whoever it is, whether they're usually liked by one side and not liked by the other. It seems Karen Bradley's not liked by anybody at the moment. But the point is, the voters' relationship is not with the Secretary of State. It's with the local political party.
So what's the point of us having a Secretary of State then? What's the point of her even coming into the country if you're right and she should do nothing about anything?
Well, if she and the other political parties have the courage to acknowledge that direct rule is the proper way of doing this, fair enough, then all responsibility devolves to her. What she's trying to do is to persuade the local political parties to do their jobs and take it on board, and she's going on this softly extend,
yeah.
which means that she doesn't really have legitimacy in terms of making any...
So I hear you, Mick. 1 second, Sean. Mick, I hear you. But is the reality, and no matter where you apportion the blame, is the cold reality that the victims are pawns in this? That
Correct.
The victims are being used for political gain in this?
Yes, that's true.
Well, how disgusting is that?
It's totally disgusting. But they're not the first set of victims to be exploited by political parties. And let's just be clear about this. That Karen Bradley is basically saying, these are your responsibilities, as it is for the health service, which is falling apart. The GP services, the point where people in the border areas are going across to see a GP in the south and paying €50 to go and see them. I mean, there's not just one set of victims here. There are victims all over the shop. We've got a school estate that needs proper management, that hasn't had proper management for at least 2 years, and probably not for a long time before that. But the primary responsibility, look, I'm not a great fan of the Conservative government. I think austerity has made things almost impossible. I think the government, the UK and Irish governments need to think about some kind of way of making it worthwhile for local ministers to come back in and actually lift the heavy burden of the Bengoa health reforms, which means investment, not just cutting. But at the same time, we have a recalcitrant political class that is refusing to do its democratic duty. And excuses over, well, we can't agree on this, that, and the other. There is no other policy that I know of in the Western world where, Belgium came very close to it, but we've long outstripped Belgium in terms of a political class that simply cannot face its own voters. With whatever record it has in
So you're saying this is for Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster to take their jobs, the responsibility that comes with their jobs, and get this sorted. That's what you're saying?
Yes. And what we're being asked, we've seen the ridiculous situation where requests for information out of the old OFM, BFM was responded with, well, we can't give you that because if we told you what the ministers had actually done, they might not get re-elected. We have a political class that's so feather-bedded with success that it will not do anything it thinks it will damage itself in the eyes of its own voters. And that's a ridiculous demand. That's effectively saying we won't do our jobs unless we can get re-elected after we go into this next period of power. That's just not acceptable. And as I say, the point being, democracy is an accountability mechanism, and the voters are not using it in Northern Ireland. They're basically being baited into taking tribal positions. They're being asked to forget about the mess in schools, the health, and the victims of institutional abuse. And pouring all of this opprobrium onto the Secretary of State, whatever she and her government are culpable for over the last 10 years of austerity, that is an illusion of where the responsibility lies.
Mick, thank you very much indeed. Mick is the editor of Slugger O'Toole.